Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to continue working on our simple house. We're going to make the UVs for our model so that we can then take it outside of Maya and put it into Quixel Bridge at a later date to be able to texture the model. Before we get started on making the UVs, we have a little bit of housekeeping that we need to do on the model itself. If you haven't seen the rest of these videos, you can check them out at my YouTube channel right here at Putting on the Fritz 3D Visualization. I have a bunch of other videos in there as well, a lot of stuff with Maya and Unreal Engine, a few things on Unity, which I hope to expand on when I have some more time. Okay, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. So right here we have the model, and I did kind of play with it a little bit off video. I increased the size of this patio, and instead of having both a front patio and a back patio, porch rather, I went ahead and just kind of made it all into one model. And if I can show it to you, all it is just this pad that goes around the circumference of the house. You can do something similar if you want, but you certainly don't have to. And with that, I added a couple more pillars on the front and pushed them out to the corners on the front and the back, so that I could take advantage of this extra overhang on the roof. And I might actually, at a later date, maybe expand the porch out just a little bit in the front to give it more of a kind of a country ranch style house look and feel. But we'll do that. I'll do that off screen some other time. And that's something you can think about as well. All right, so let's go ahead and kind of start breaking some things down for our grouping here and decide how we want things to kind of work together. A lot of this can be just left alone like it is, and I can just put it into one big group for the house. But there are a couple things that we may want to put together so that in the future, if we want to make it so that these glass doors open or the front door opens, it can move in one piece, and we don't have to worry about the glass being left in place or the doorknob being left in place, depending on which door we're talking about. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get started now. I'm going to select this outer door frame and then the glass that goes with it. So I'm going to hold shift and just click on the glass, and now I have them both selected, so I know which one is which. Now what I really want to do is I want to parent the glass to the door frame. And the glass is this piece right here, and this is the sliding glass piece door here. So just by selecting it, using my middle mouse button, clicking and dragging, I can drop it onto the door sliding piece there. All right? And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other door here. And I know that this window one is the one that goes to that, so I'm going to select it. And first, before I do that, I'm going to take a look at it. It looks like I need to maybe freeze my transformations on some of this stuff. Why don't we go ahead and do that first? We're going to go ahead and select everything. I'm going to go to Edit, Delete by Type History, rid of a lot of the extra history that I don't need. Then I'm going to go ahead and modify, freeze the transformations. You'll see that everything here zeroes back out. My scale and everything goes to 1. And with that, then what I want to do is I'm going to go to Modify, and I'm going to center pivot everything so that now as I select the individual pieces, the pivots are where they're supposed to be. It doesn't really affect what happened down here with this door, but I just noticed that we hadn't done that in a while. So I'm going to go ahead and save what I have right now. Alright, so back to what we're doing here. My sliding door and then my window. So I'm going to select the window. I'm going to middle mouse button, click and drag and drop it onto that door there, and you can see now it is a child of the parent for the door frame. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to kind of group these three together. So the outer door frame along with the three pieces here. So I'm going to select that door frame there, and I'm going to hold the control button and select these two parents. I'm going to do Control P, or actually I'm going to do Control G because I want to group them. Control G, and now they're into a group. I'm going to name this group sliding glass door. Okay, and now if I look inside there, everything is set up the way it needs to be. And if I wanted to, I could select it and move this away as one unit. I can also select the individual sliding glass door, and if I slide it, the whole thing moves as one piece, which is kind of the intent. Okay, the next thing I want to do is the same thing for the front door. I'm going to select my doorknob, which is there, and this is my front door, which is there, and then this would be my door frame. So with the doorknob, I'm going to select it down here, middle mouse button, click and drag and drop it on my front door. And then what I'm going to do is select the door frame along with the door itself to include the doorknob. Again, I'm going to hit Control G. I'm going to create a group out of that. We're going to call this front door. Okay, so now everything should be grouped together like we want it. If I hit E to rotate this door, we can see that we're still going to have an issue with this, and that's because the location of our rotating for our door is actually in the center. When we center pivoted everything, we put it right back here. With the door, we're going to have to fix that at a later date when we do want to start using our door to pivot from the wall right here. And we'll go over that later on. Okay, so we can do the same thing for all these windows. If we wanted to, we could put the window with the appropriate window frame, but that probably isn't necessary. What I do want to do though is group all of my windows together and group all of my window frames together, just so that I can find them quick and easy in their own categories. The same thing for the pillars. So what I'm going to do, instead of going through and selecting each one here, I'm going to do it here in my hierarchy, or my outliner. Going back and forth between programs, I can't get my terminology right. Okay, so I select them all. Again, Control G, I'm going to group them all together. We'll just call this Windows. Do the same thing for my window frames. And at some point, if we do want to come back and make sliding glass windows or sliding windows with, change up the way the windows are, we can always come back, pull them out of these groups, and do that. Go ahead and group those together. Window frames. Pillars. Now that's kind of broken everything down into smaller groups for us so that we can go in and find individual pieces. Leaves the major components like the floor, the walls, the roof, and the porch out. We could group them into subgroups if we wanted to, but there's really no need for that from this model anyway. Alright, so now what I want to do is I do want to select everything, and with it all selected, Control G one more time. And actually, I don't think I want to do it that way. Let's go ahead and do it a little bit differently. Select them all, and put them all in a group like that. What happened before was when I did a marquee select, it broke all of the subcomponents out of the groups that we've just put them in, and put them in underneath this top group. I still wanted to have these groups in here, so we needed to select those individually so that those groups would stay in the way we have them set up. So with this, I am now just going to go ahead and call this house. Okay, so everything's all grouped together. Now that we have it into the top group, we can move it around as one piece. It's also easier to scale it this way without breaking things. And like I said, we can move it around, and we can also export it much easier. All right, so now that we have it all set up, we are going to go ahead and get into making our UVs. I'm going to show you the process, and then I'll pause and let you follow through and do some of those on your own. We will do this we will do the UVs for the glass as well, although the material that we're using in Maya, we'll probably keep using it. We're not going to change it. But once we have the UVs done, they'll be there, and we'll be able to, when we move on to the next piece, which is exporting it into Unreal Engine, we'll use some different glass material setup inside of Unreal Engine. And that we will need the UVs for. All right, so with that, I guess we'll go ahead and start with the simple one, which would be some windows. So back to my object mode, I'm going to go ahead and select one of the windows. And with that window selected, pretty simple. I'm just going to go up into my UVs up here at the top, go to UV editor, and when I open it up, it's going to lay the UV out for me. Now, one of the things about the UV is that this started off as a cube, and that's what we see here, is this is all set up as a cube. But what we actually want it to do is we want it to take that piece and park that over there on my other model. What we actually want it to do is we want it to look like the shape of our window. We know that it is not these equal-sided squares, especially on the edges anymore. So let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to go ahead and just use the automatic one for these. I'm going to go up to Create, Automatic. And first we actually need to select something. So let's go ahead and do that. UV shell, so right click, go to your UV shell, and then do a marquee select just like this. And we're going to go and Create, Automatic. And now it's going to break it down into our glass for us. And I'm going to do that for all the windows. I'm just going to use the automatic layout for these because these are just going to be seen on two sides, and the material we just want it to be able to go on to our windows without creating any type of distortion. Unless, of course, it has some texture that we're applying to it, but we want that distortion that we apply to it to actually look natural too. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to pause. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and finish all my windows up. Okay, so I finished up my windows. It's actually pretty simple. If you did it individually one by one, that's a method. But because these are kind of repeated and they're on their own model plane when we do this, you can actually select them all at the same time and then do the marquee select, go to Create and Create Automatic. And then when you select them individually, they'll all set up with their own UVs. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and move this out of the way. I think the next thing I'm going to move on to is something a little bit more complicated, which is going to be the walls. Okay, the door process we'll get to in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and select the walls. And when I do that, again, because it started off as a cube, we've got this kind of thing going on. If yours are not, if your UVs are not popping out and looking correct when you're going to the automatic thing, double check to make sure that you cleared your history and you froze your transformation. So again, modify, freeze your transformations, because what will happen is it may not necessarily put your UVs to be correct to what the actual shape of your model is. All right. So now what I've got is I've got this house, and again, if I go and select it so that the house is standing by itself. Let me try this again. All right, so I just have my walls. They're all connected together because remember I went ahead and connected them. And then the UVs are going to go ahead and try to cut it up into something that makes sense to Maya. And it may not necessarily be what we want. Because remember, we're going to try to keep our edges together as much as possible to create this kind of wraparound appearance on our model, but we also want it so that it's easier to set up in our texturing software. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to go to UV shell. I'm just going to select it, and I'm going to see what it looks like with the automatic. Okay, I'm going to break it out, and actually, it's not too far off from how I would set it up. but I am going to change a few things about it, okay? So what we need to think about is when we are actually going to texture this model, where are our breaks going to be? And so far, I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing here. Click off this, it goes away, so we see the lines. These white lines indicate where the UVs are split, and it did it right on the corners where I like to do it. Sometimes we may want to actually put these pieces together so that we can have a kind of a wraparound effect. But we also need to think about the scale of what our UVs are going to be as we're putting them together, so that as we start to texture, we get the best fidelity of our textures that we can get, so they don't look pixelated or kind of funny as we start to scale things down or up. So in this case, I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it this way. We can always come back and we can always re-stitch these together so that we can fix our edges, but we're going to try to line our edges up in our software a little bit. The other thing is the window frames. I do want to make it actually these window frames aren't going to be seen any, because these windows actually have a model window frame inside of them. So if you were just going to use these as your visible edges and your visual surfaces, then you may want to stitch these together so that any textures would flow naturally. And it also depends on the material that you're using. So if you're going to use like a wood type material, you want the wood grain to go in the correct direction, and you may not want to necessarily stitch them together, but you want to make sure you've got them all kind of moving in the same direction that you want them to go to. And I'm also not going to use the door frame openings or the top opening or the bottom opening. None of these are actually going to be visible to the player or to the person who's going to see the model. So when we take a look at our UVs and we think about that, that means that we have a lot of extra stuff here that isn't going to be visible, which could open up the area that we want to lay things out in the center for our model. With that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move these things over out of the way. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do after I get these over out of my way is I'm going to go ahead and start to get these identified so I know which UVs belong to what part of my house, because we have an inside and we also have outside. I want to select all my inside parts, and I'm going to move them up out of the way. Really matter where I put them. Just going to place them for a moment. All right, so those are all of my UVs that are for the inside of the house. These are the outside. So the next thing I need to do is I need to rotate them so that they are in a direction that makes sense for me. I'm going to set them up in my 0 to 1, which is this grid square right here, and I'm going to rotate them the 90 degrees that I need to get them facing the right direction. So one way to do that is with it selected, you can hold the shift button, right click, and then you can rotate the shell. And you just need to decide if you want to rotate it counterclockwise or clockwise. So this one would be counterclockwise. Hold the shift, again, rotate the shell. This one is going to be clockwise. Helps to select the right one. Let's try that again. And hold the shift button down. There we go. Okay, so that's the process. I'm going to go ahead and let you get yours lined up in the right direction. I'm going to do the same thing for mine, and I'm going to put them down here in the 0 to 1. And I'm also going to try to scale these a little bit larger as well so that I can maximize my use of this space and get my UVs as large as possible so that when I'm working with them in Quixel, it is a little bit easier for me to texture it and see what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and pause for right now, and I'm going to get these laid out, and I'll let you do the same on your own. Okay, so now I'm back, and what I decided to do was put them in this format right here, okay? So that I have my top ones up here, and my bottom one, my inside house. On the top, I have the outside of the house, and then on the bottom, I have the inside of the house, and we can kind of hover over these to see that. I select all those. Now I've selected okay, well, let's try that again. Got one of these in the wrong spot. Which one is it? It's that one. Which means one of these should be the outside, and this one should be the inside. Okay, there we go. So now these are my upper ones. These upper ones are my outer part of my house, and these are my inner part of the house. So what I want to do is I want to scale everything, even though I'm not using these parts right now. You know, there might be a reason to come back for them in the future. So I want to make sure that I keep my scale the same. I'm going to line all this up and maximize my space in between these. Give myself enough room to work, but I want to make sure I have enough room to actually expand these as well. Alright, so I'm going to select them all, and I'm going to hit R on my keyboard, and I'm going to scale these until I use the maximum amount of space possible inside of my 0 to 1. And you can tell 0 to 1 because right here there's this green line that goes up and this red line that goes to the right, and it starts at 0 right here. Okay, I think I can get a little bit more out of it. Okay, so that is setting up the UVs for my house. Now these don't really matter as much, so I'm just going to move them over here. I'll probably just place them in here just to keep them close but not in the way. Something like that. Okay. Now that's set up for the outside walls, and we'll get to the point where we export these UVs when we're ready to start texturing, and I'll show you that process in the texturing video. But this is kind of the general process. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing now for the roof. So let's go back here, Control 1 to bring my house back. And for the rest of these, just about everything is going to be visible with the exception of the bottom of the patio and the bottom of the floor. But I'm going to show you the roof and also then get into the window frames, because we do want some kind of logic set up so that when we go to apply the textures to our materials to our window frames here and the door frames, we kind of get this continuity between them so that pieces of the material would actually wrap around. So we'll get into that here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and select the roof, and the roof is showing me that it's two pieces right now, so let me go ahead and show you this, and that's because of the way that we set this up, or the way I set mine up with the mirroring process and then the extrusion, so it really kind of confuses it in this method if we just look at it and leave it just this way. What we want to do is we're going to go to UV shell, I'm going to select it again, I'm going to go with automatic to get the shape that I want, and then we're going to take a look and see how it broke it down, because with the roof we're going to have the outside material, we're going to have the inside material, but we also have an area here that's going to cause us an issue that we're going to want to paint on the inside, and also on the outside. So the inside material, under the eaves material, the roofing material, and then the wraparound part of the eaves for the roof. So even though it looks like the roof is ready to go, it really isn't. What we need to do is we need to create some edge loops that we can use to help make some selections later on for us to be able to identify what material goes where. And that will give us some additional faces that will work with our roof. So let's go ahead and do that real quick, and you'll see what I'm talking about as we move along. It's not a real hard process. I'm going to go ahead and go to object mode, and I'm just going to add some edge loops. So shift, right click and hold, and then I always like to go to the object box the first time out just to see where I have my edge loop tool set. And right now it's set on relative distance. That's where I want it. So now I'm going to find a line that will allow me to put a perpendicular line into it right here. So basically I want to set this up so that it runs right along the edge part of my roof there, my roof line. And if we have trouble seeing it, you can always hit 4 on your keyboard and you can see it goes right through the center part of the roof. That's going to be good for me. That's going to hide kind of that piece there. And I want to do the same thing over here. I want to put an edge loop in that will run through the edge, through the center part of the wall here. Something like that. Same over here. And then the last one down over here. Again, if we're off a little bit, we can always move these lines. Okay, so hit 6. Now I've created some additional geometry, but it's going to help me set up the way I want my house to look and the materials to go on to this one piece of the model. Because this is just really a flat plane that we've modified a little bit to take on the shape of a roof. And the rest of it is going to come out in the details as we start to put the materials on. Okay, so another thing about a roof is that when you roof it, you put the roofing material on, you use this edge along the top, if you have a peaked roof like this, for your material to go downward in this direction and downward in this direction. So even though my UVs are set up like this right now, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to divide the way the top half of the outer part of the roof is compared to the bottom half. And let's go ahead and take a look and see what that looks like. So if I go ahead and I'm going to hit Q to quit my tool because I was using my edge loop tool. I'm going to select my edge and I'm just going to click right there. And that is this piece of the roof right here. We can see that the roof itself, its divider is right here. And when we go to apply the materials, this will be something that we'll pay attention to. The reason why I'm not going to cut it and put a cut line in there so we can just easily identify it is because the inside of the material and the eaves won't necessarily be following that same rule of a material being laying in a certain direction. Now if you're using a flat roof, this is not an issue for you. Okay, so I think so far the roof's looking pretty good, but I do want to see how these eaves are being treated. So we're going to go ahead and go to our UV shell. I'm going to select the UV shell and see where these are laying at. And that's right here. The other one's over here, which is his back piece. And then these two other pieces are right here. I'm just going to rearrange things a little bit so I know what's what, I guess, is a good way of saying it. And I also am probably just going to move these, rotate them out of the way, and try to scale everything up just a little bit more. Even though it kind of did a pretty decent job, I want to move it more. So I'm going to select this one. I'm going to put it over here, really close for a minute. I'm going to select these two and pull them up. Shift, right click, rotate the shell, and it doesn't really matter. I'm going to rotate clockwise for those. And it looks like I missed the other one. Nice job. Let's try that again. Okay, put those up over here. And then I'm going to select these two. Same thing. I'm going to rotate them counterclockwise. Stick them up here. Select everything, R, scale it up as much as I can. Not that I have a lot of room to work with because we've already taken up a lot of space. If you're not sure that you've got these actually inside the lines, because you can push them right to the edge, you can zoom in, of course, to see, but you can also turn on the little checkerboard. And if we have checkerboard that goes outside this area, so for example, if I scale it too big, you can start to see that it starts to fill in everywhere that our UVs are. You want to make sure you don't have checkerboard all over the place for your UVs, because we're trying to keep them here in our 0 and 1. And that's another thing to take a look at when we're messing with our UVs. Right now everything's been pretty flat, and I've been keeping it to scale. But we do want to make sure that our UVs aren't deformed, we don't have any weird deformation going on, and that the scale is the same across all the surfaces that we're working with. And in this case, because we start off with cubes and we didn't do anything really radical with them, they should come out okay. But with that said, they don't always, okay? And we can double check our other UVs just to make sure. Okay, so now with that done, let's go ahead and do the next thing. The concrete for the patio and the floor are going to be a similar process. I'm not going to show those to you at the end. I'll go ahead, I'm going to pause the video, and at the end I will show you what those look like. For the pillars though, I do want to do something a little bit different. And let's go ahead and talk about that real quick. Because we do have a bunch of pillars, I do anyway, you may only have one or two. We're going to do those real quick, and then I'll also get on to the window frames real quick and show you the process for each individual one, and then you can follow that process. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and again select it. Let's go to UV show first. Select it, automatic. Now you could manually cut these out, but I usually do automatic to force them into the right size first off, and then I go ahead and adjust them from there. For the pillars, we have the same issue. We're not using these two pieces right here. I'm going to move them out of the way for right now. It doesn't hurt to put texture on them, but we don't necessarily need to worry about that all the time if they're not going to be seen. Alright, so what I have is I have the pillars. They're cut down into 4 pieces, so each of the sides of the pillar are shown here. I want to make sure that my pillars actually only have 1 seam. I don't need 4 seams. These white lines represent seams in our texture. So think of it this way. If we're cutting these to cover them with material, and we cut it so that the material, so a piece of cloth or something that we're going to lay over the top of this and we glued it on, there would be 4 seams in that particular those pieces of cloth. So there would be 4 seams. They would have a chance for things to not be lined up. We want to try to make sure that since this is a solid wood pillar, whether you put paint on it or some sort of a wood texture, you're going to want to make sure that your paint lines match up, or your grooves for your wood. So what we want to do is we want to actually stitch these back together so that we only have 1 seam. And we put that seam someplace where it's probably not going to be as obvious to a player. You can't get away with it completely, because obviously here the player is going to be able to walk around this. But if we lay everything out properly, then that last seam should work out okay. So the way we do that is we're going to go to Edge, and I'm going to select the edge, Okay, and you can see that when it laid this out, my edges, I've got this one here and this one here, so these are actually flipped from each other as well. So if we hold the shift button down, right click, we can go to move and sew edges. So I'm going to do that, move and sew edges, and what that's done is it's now sewed those together. And then I want to do the same thing for this one. I'm going to go ahead and right click. You can also, if let's see, move and sew edges. Alright, those won't go together. Let's see here. Let me see my UV shell. Move it out of the way so I can visualize what I'm doing. There we go. Okay, so I've got that one together. The one I want to leave cut is in that back corner, so I'm just going to do it from here. I'm going to select my edge there. I'm going to hold shift, right click, move and sew edges. And then I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to go do it to this end over here. Sometimes it's easier to visualize what you're doing on the model itself. And then I'm going to do the same thing, shift, right click, move and sew edges. And there we have it. Now they're all one piece, but it's still laid out flat, so we can put our material on it. And since these are maximized to scale already, I'm just going to go ahead and grab these two ends, maybe, and put them back over here. And I'll probably just do it this way. And then we take a look at our pillar. The squares on our pillar should line up pretty well, and they should not be deformed. Okay, pretty good. So that needs to happen for any other pillars that you have. Now, if you're using a round pillar, you might run into some other issues that, especially if you've squished it in and done some fancy modeling to it to give it sort of a column look to it, then it's a similar process. You want to make sure that you line up your ends to your pillars so that they are attached like we did just here, and make it so that they're wrapped more and you only have one seam, and that would be somewhere perhaps on the back. Now, if you're a thinking person, what you might do is, if these are all going to be the same, and instead of having to, again, repeat this process, what you could do is you could duplicate this particular pillar and replace these other pillars with it, since all these pillars are about the same size and scale. And then that would set you up so you don't have to make multiple UVs. All right, so just a tip there. So I'm going to go ahead, and now we're going to roll into doing the window frames. And at the end of this, I'll come back after I pause, and I'll show you my solutions for some of the other things. You know what? I'll also show you the doorknob, because the doorknob does have a cylinder and a sphere that we've modified pretty heavily. So that might help you see another way of doing UVs. That might help you with your pillars if you have pillars as well. Okay, so with the window frame, I have it selected here, and you can see all the little cuts in it, but it's not to scale again. So go ahead and create automatic, and it's going to pop it out like this, okay? And this is not anywhere close to the way I want it to be. What I want to do is I actually want it so that the window frame itself, as much as possible, has these, it's kind of split so that the paint kind of makes a lot more sense as far as the way the paint would go around our window frame. And by that, what I mean is there's some sections where I would want to cut it, and others where I want to have them so that they are attached together. And when we're looking at this, let's see here. We're looking at this. Let me start thinking through this. Okay, so inside, outside. This would be a piece across here. Actually, now that I think about it, and I'm looking at the way it's set up, I think I'm going to go ahead and just leave this the way it is. These aren't too bad. One thing we could have done is we could cut it here, but that's going to give us a weird seam here. So this doesn't give us a seam that's visible on the front. There will be a seam here, but there's a natural seam at that point because it's a 90-degree angle. And the same with the outer edges of the window. But the major part of the window that will be seen is this piece here and this piece down here. And that's going to be okay. So when we go to texture it, we'll have to see what it looks like, but I'm pretty sure that this is going to come out okay. There may be kind of an odd seam at this point on this 90-degree where we may have like a paint chip or a scratch or something that just kind of ends here and doesn't wrap around, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it would either in real life. So we're going to go ahead, and I'm not too unhappy with this. So we're going to go ahead and leave this the way it is and just double check to make sure everything's scaled. And since we did the automatic, it usually comes out pretty good when we're working with square or cube objects. Okay. Another thing you can do is this tool here allows us to see what's deformed, which there's no deformation in it. He's pointing in the right direction, so yeah, it's good. Okay, so let me go ahead and turn that off. So for all the windows, and Control 1 to get your house back. All the windows, it's going to be pretty good. Window frames will probably come out the same way. I would use that process and set that up if it comes out similar to what my UV just did for this window here. The last thing I want to show you real quick are the doorknobs. Since we made this doorknob in the last video, and it is sort of like a little dumbbell. Let's go ahead and take a look to see how this is set up. Now this is where things kind of get weird usually, but we'll see. Maybe we'll get lucky. I'm going to do the shell. Go ahead and select it all, and I'm going to go ahead and do automatic. And we can see how it kind of breaks things out. And what's going to happen is it's going to put some seams on our doorknob. The doorknobs are usually pretty small objects in a game, but if it was something that we're going to focus on in a video or something like that, it would be something that we would need to kind of pay attention to. And let's see here. Hard to do this with that window in my way. Alright, so here we have these different sections that have been kind of cut out on us. Yeah, alright. There we go. And you can see these sections here along the top. Kind of odd. But when we think about the way, you're going to cut out a sphere, that might make sense, but I think what I want to do instead is try to put it all together and then cut it so that I get a better layout with less seams, less obvious seams. Yeah, we're going to do that. Alright, so the way to do that is I'm not going to select this piece down here, these UV shells along here. I'm going to leave those the way they are. They're not very visible, but they do need to get material applied to them. And the way they're set out, they're going to be pretty flat. They're going to have several seams, which we could stitch together. And in fact, we'll come back and stitch those together so we only have one scene. But first I'm going to stitch all of these together. I'm just going to do a marquee select of those. And select all of those. And then I'm going to just make a big mess. I'm going to go ahead and go up here and just say stitch together. Oops, sorry. So, there we go. And I think I accidentally pulled those in anyway. Alright, so now that that's done, and I have this huge mess, move this out of my way. Yeah, everything's selected. So it sewed those back together anyway because of the edges. That's alright, we'll go ahead and pull those back out in a minute. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull this section out that we just sewed back in. We're going to go to edge, and it's kind of hard to do this because it's very small, and because it's so small, manipulating it in the window is kind of fun. I'm going to try to select that line there. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and select that, and I'm just going to go cut it, okay, and hit W, move that out of the way. Oops, did I miss something? It looks like I missed something. Ah, it's because I don't have it all cut. Let's do that first. Okay. I should just stay zoomed in on it. This is probably where if I go to my 4 windows, it might actually work. No, it's not going to work any better. I'm going to select that line. I'm going to cut it to W. I should be able to go to my UV shells. Pull this out of the way. Now what I want to do is I'm going to cut it one more time before I lay that out. Okay, let's see here. So what we can do is we can select it and go to Control 1 on all of our windows here so that we can have the different angles of our model visible. Make this a little bit easier. This is my top view. Wait for a minute. And where are you? And my side view. What I could do is I could bring in an additional bottom view because I really want to cut it down here at the bottom. But I'm going to do that here. I'm just going to select this bottom line down there as close to as I can get right there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just cut it again. I'm going to go back to my UV shell. And I'm going to unfold it. And that should be everything for that cylinder. So if you were using cylinders or something similar, this is a method that you could use to try to get that straightened out for you. And actually, I think that's the top. Okay, so start 1. Now we need to do the same thing for the spheres themselves. Okay? And what I want to do is I want to do something similar. I'm going to first cut it along the bottom and try to lay that out. And then we're going to have to do some cuts to get it a little bit better laid out, I suppose. More better? Okay, so let's see here. 2 separate spheres. Let's do that over there. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Here. Edge. And it's going to cut across the entire model. What do I want to do? Move this out of the way. I think I am going to change this to bottom because I'm going to try to get my cuts along my initial cuts along the bottom. There are going to be some additional cuts that will be visible, which will create a seam. But I'm going to go to my panels here and into my orthographic, new, and I'm going to select bottom. And I'm going to find my model. And I'm going to select that line right there. And along that edge, I'm going to come here, hold my shift button and double click so that I've selected just that one piece of the model. This would be easier if this model was actually in the center location. But and with that line selected, I'm also going to hold the shift button and cut it there. And then here, I'm going to hold let's see, we're just going to split it out right there. So we're just going to go ahead and cut it right there. See what kind of a mess this gives us. All right. Because we cut it along the back here originally, we have much larger area there. And what we may want to do is actually just kind of split this so that this is in two halves. We have a seam at the bottom, and we'll have a seam at the top, So I think what I was going to do was cut it here. Select it right here. Good job. Let's try that again. Right there. And lined up. That's probably what my issue is. I'm not using the right one. Oh, wow. Okay, lots of fun. Not sure what's happening here. Let's just undo everything. Select the one we want. I think I'm just having issues with this, so we'll do this. Still not getting it. What is happening here? You know what? It's harder than it has to be. Okay, helps to actually have the correct line selected. Let's go ahead and cut that. Select the UVs, unfold these. Now we're going to end up with some distortion if we're not careful. Right along the edges there. And we'll have some weird seams. Okay, if you ever lose your model, if you have it selected, hit F on your keyboard. It helps you find it. And one thing that might have helped is I could have cut it along here and laid this out flat as well. But overall, not too bad. And if we take a look at this in our UVs here, turn on our distortion map, you can see that we have some issues. Not terribly bad. It's going to be okay. We still have some distortions back here on this one. I'm not sure if they're bleeding off of this. So we're going to go ahead and do the same cuts on this one. And after hitting F on my keyboard, I've discovered that my camera was off center. So now everything's kind of lined up nice and neat again. So it's going to be a little easier to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. And since I know I want it to go all the way around to the other side, I'm going to click. I'm going to hold Shift and double click. And not what I wanted to do. So let's try this again. We'll just shift there. Select it there. Turn off the checkerboard. And then on the opposite side, that's here. So there. There. I'm just doing this in little segments so I don't get lost again. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut this again. Unfold them. Okay, so also we can see we're having some significant difference in our scales across all of these. And we're going to have to fix that too. But now we've got everything kind of cut and back here. We'll go ahead and take a look at it with the checkerboard on. We are going to have some seaming along the front. I think it's going to be a little less noticeable than it was before. Take a look at our distortion, and it's got a little bit of distortion, but we are working with cylinders and spheres. We could do a lot more cuts, but we're also going to get into the realm of having a lot more seams then. In this case, I think I want less seams than I am worried about distortion on a small model like this that is going to be some sort of a metallic material. So it may not stand out as much anyway. So let's go ahead and fix our layouts here. So I'm going to turn this checkerboard off, turn off the distortion for right now. I'm going to go ahead and go to UV shell, select everything, and let's go ahead and go to modify and go to layout option box. We'll try the unfold method first. Packing, shell rotation, off, preserve 3D ratios. 248 pixels, shell padding, tile padding. Well, we'll just leave everything the way it is and see what we end up with. Okay, there we go. And it's basically laid this out automatically for us. Has everything back to the same scale. So if I turn on my checkerboard, I should see on my model itself that the squares are fairly the same size. And all in all, there you have it. Okay, so go ahead and close this for now. Well, I'm going to just move it out of the way. All right, so that's it for the doorknob. Bring everything back. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I've shown you several techniques. Some things kind of worked out with automatic, like the window frames. Some things are going to have to be pasted together, or you can, like I said, duplicate other things to get it to work out for you. And now that I turn those squares on, it's not looking so good. Oh, that's because it's the wrong frame. Sure, you don't want to lose the one that you're working with. But you can, again, delete and duplicate, since this is the same model over and over again here. Similar process to the floor. Mine's all messed up because of the way I have extruded this, and I'll have to fix that, but it should fix pretty easily once I lay out my UVs. Again, think about sections that are going to be visible on the floor and on the patio, and get your door frames, windows done, and door are all pretty much the same process of everything I've shown you already. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. I'm going to complete my UVs for the house and show you my results real quick, and we'll wrap this video up. Okay, so I'm on to the patio now. I've got most of my UVs done, and when I broke it apart, I've moved some things around a little bit, but I rotated this 180 degrees, flipped it so that it's basically facing the same direction. This is my top piece of my patio. Maybe I should put it over here so you can see it. So this is the UV for my patio, porch, whatever you want to call it. And I've rotated this piece so that it's the same direction as the top piece. And then I've moved these up here, and I'm going to actually grab these here. Because what I want to do is I want to try to expand this as much as I can. So I'm going to stack everything to allow me to do that, and it's just something like that. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this bottom piece, and I'm actually going to grab the top piece. I'm going to stack the top piece on top of the bottom piece like this. Now you could also just move that bottom piece completely out of the way. What's going to happen is, however I texture this is going to end up texturing the bottom piece of my patio as well, in the same manner. I want to make sure that I put this one on top though, so I know what I'm working with. Again, you could also just move the bottom piece completely out of the way, which is also acceptable. You'll still get some sort of a texture on it, but it's not going to be seen anyway, usually. And I'm going to select everything. I'm going to scale it all up the same scale, just in case I need to come back and do something with that bottom piece in the future. Do something like that. What I could actually do to maximize this as much as possible is I could also grab these, maybe. Now, I got to fit in there. We could move them off to the side here, since we can scale this bigger this direction. And I think that's probably good enough, and I just broke my rules. Scale it all equally. There we go. Something like that. And I'll just move this back over here. Okay, so that is one approach to doing something like the patio. The floor is a similar approach. You can either choose to put them side by side. Now, with the way that this is set up, because of the length of it, it's already pretty much maximized in this area. Again, I could take it out. I would get just a little bit more room, but at this point, it's not going to be worth the effort on that. One thing about the door. So if you've done your door already, when you select it, you notice you end up with the UVs both for the doorknob and for the door, and that's because they're parented together right here. So here's my doorknob. The front door, when I select it, we get to see both of those. Now, what you can do is, if in order to be able to get the UV and not have the doorknob in the way, you could select these individually and work around them, but it's also pretty easy to just select the doorknob right here, and you can hit Control H, and that'll hide the doorknob. Now you can work with just the door itself, get everything laid out. You're going to want to do this anyway when we go to export these UVs, so you're going to have to hide it anyhow, but hiding it like that and then bringing it back, again, you can hit Control Shift H if that's the last thing that you hid. You can also go up into your display and go to show, and then show all. If you can't find it at all, show last, or whatever you select. So if you selected it over here, you can also do show selection. Okay, so that's that for those two things, and three things with the floor. So let's go ahead and take a look real quick. I'm going to run through. Again, I pretty much just left the window frames on automatic, so all of those were done. The pillars, my front pillars were a little taller than my back pillars, so I went ahead and did UVs for one of the pillars here, deleted them all, and just moved the pillar over, and you can see that. Now, because I have all these funky numbers here, they're not in a row anymore, because I've duplicated them, and I did the same back here. We already went over the roof, the patio. Go ahead and minimize this a little bit more. So the patio, the walls, I believe that's everything for the house. We now have our UVs laid out, and I apologize, this video took an hour and 15 minutes, but UVs can be a little bit tricky. They're not scary. Some people just don't like doing them because they seem so confusing. There's so much to them. It's hard to see them sometimes. It's hard to see the vision. What you got to think about is your texturing, how your texture, or how you're going to texture that particular piece of the model. And this in itself is a job in the industry. Your texture artists, your coloring artists, all that. And it's quite a bit of skill to master this. I'm by no means claiming to be a master, but certainly UVs are an important part, very important part of making your model look believable, no matter whether it's going to be a stylized type model or whether it's going to be trying to make it look realistic. Cartoon type, or whatever your model you're going for, UVs can help make that or break that model, making sure that you don't have any stretching, any warping, deformation, to make sure that your textures go on nice and neat and clean. Okay, so with that, that is going to go ahead and be the end of this video. The next video will be actually exporting these, we're getting everything set up in Maya with color IDs. We're going to do color IDs and then export the UV color IDs into Quixel Mixer to apply our textures. And that will probably take up another entire video, and then we'll get into the texturing process in the next video after that. Okay, again, if you've missed some of this lessons and you want to kind of get caught up, you can go ahead and visit me here at Putting on the Fritz 3D Visualization. and catch the previous videos, 1, 2, and 3 on making this model. And then, of course, this one was on UVs. And also subscribe to my channel so that you can catch the future videos for this project as they come out. If you like what you see, please like my video. And again, subscribe. I'll see you next time.